The most well-known bit of Appalachian history has to be the feud between the families of Randall McCoy and Devil Anse Hatfield. Now, that story has been told over and over again by different podcasts and YouTube channels to an audience that apparently can't get enough of it. Today, though, we're going to share with you part of the story that isn't often heard. What happened to the Hatfields and the McCoys after that feud had burned itself out? Hello, folks. I'm Steve Gilley, along with Rod Mullins, and this is Stories, a History of Appalachia.
Well, Steve, a lot of people, follow, and they've been across all these different kinds of podcasts and vlogs and so forth about the Hatfield and McCoy feud. There's so many stories been told about it. There's only one real story that took place, but, I guess in all of that demand and, of trying to find out that information about what really happened during the feud, a lot of people forget about what happened after the feud with Devil Anse Hatfield, the family of the Hatfields, and also with the McCoy family. But we're getting ready to tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit more about what happened after the feud.
Yeah, and there's some tragedy involved in that, and just a whole lot of history that really hasn't been gotten into very deeply, and we're going to share what we found with you. Well, after the McCoy cabin was burned down and Calvin and Alifair McCoy were killed during that Hatfield raid on New Year's Day, 1888, the family moved down to Pikeville for safety. Now, there was a trial of several Hatfield family members who had been captured by Bad Frank Phillips in 1889, with Ellison Cottontop Mounts executed in Kentucky for his part in the McCoy killings. Sally McCoy suffered from injuries in that raid, and she died a few years later. Randall McCoy lived the rest of his life quietly, and he tragically died on March 28, 1914, when he fell into a cooking fire and was severely burned. Now, he's been buried in the Dills Cemetery in Pikeville, next to Sally, and just a few feet from his daughter Rosanna. Now, I've been up there, Rod. It's a very interesting place. It's been a few years, I think 2017. At that time, you could go in and go right up to the gravesite, up to the marker for all three of them. Since then, I think it's become such a popular location for people that they've put up a wrought iron fence around there to kind of keep you away from the graves themselves. But it's an interesting visit if you ever get a chance to go to Pikeville and check that out.
Been to Pikeville, been several times. I haven't been down there, though, but that sounds like a very interesting trip, to say the least. Well, Devil Anse Hatfield did anything but slip quietly from history, though. He and his family became vigilantes of a sort, with at least one incident reported where they chased down a group of black workers who had stolen money from some of their co-workers around a railroad tunnel somewhere in southern West Virginia. Devil Anse retrieved the money plus $100 for the expenses, and he got that from the thieves, then chased the men out of the area. After he had done that, he had signs hung at both ends of the tunnel that read, well, we can't really say what it was said, can we, Steve?
No, other than that certain people would be dealt with severely, and that's as far as I'm going to go with that.
Yeah, we're not going to hold up little whiteboards like they used to do on television when they, about calling a state or something, either with those words on it either. This is a family show. Yeah. All right. Anse decided that it would be a good idea to cash in on the publicity the newspapers had brought to the feud. So he and other members of the Hatfield and McCoy families agreed to, reenact scenes from the feud for movie cameras and for photographers, with those films showing up in Nickelodeons across the country, solidifying the image of violent hillbillies for years to come.
Well, Rod, speaking of cashing in, Devil Anse also, get this, signed a contract to go on the Vaudeville circuit, where he would tell his story of the feud and would reenact scenes live in front of an audience. And that might have been a good idea, except for one thing. Devil Anse Hatfield, fearless feudist, sharp businessman, scourge of the McCoy family in eastern Kentucky, suffered from, yes, folks, stage fright. At one of his first appearances on the vaudeville stage in Charleston, West Virginia, Devil Anse took one look at the huge audience there to see him and had a bit of a meltdown. He had to literally force himself to go out on stage and face all those strangers staring at him. Now, Hatfield had appearances scheduled for the coming months all over the country, and his family worried that he wouldn't be able to handle the stress and anxiety associated with his nightly performances. So they came up with a novel idea. You see, during the worst of the feud, a federal restraining order had been placed on Devil Anse that ordered him not to travel outside the state of West Virginia. His family lawyers ended up using that old court document to get him out of the contract to perform on Vaudeville. How about that, Rod?
Wow. I did not know that at all. But, in 1911, Devil Anse's sons, Troy and Elias, who owned a bar in Fayette County, were killed in a dispute with an Italian immigrant over liquor trade. Those deaths affected Devil Anse very deeply, and he turned to his friend and former Civil War comrade, Uncle Dyke Garrett, a circuit-riding Baptist preacher. Uncle Dyke spoke to Anse, and the two soon arranged for a baptism for the old feudist on Main Island Creek. So in 1912, Devil Anse Hatfield was dunked under the water 3 times for the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and he was certified, or at least saved. Well, the image was so moving that Jonesy and Cap Hatfield also agreed to be saved the same way that very day, and Uncle Dyke Garrett baptized them too. And for the rest of his life, Steve, Anderson Hatfield lived peacefully at his farm on Island Creek, raising hogs.
Well, he suffered a stroke followed by pneumonia and passed away at his home on January 6, 1921. He was buried after a funeral that had one of the biggest crowds in southern West Virginia, with 5,000 people attending. Now, he's buried in the Hatfield Family Cemetery in Logan County beneath a life-size statue of himself made from fine imported Italian marble. That cemetery, by the way, is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and his wife, Levice, outlasted Devil Anse by 8 years. Among his well-known relatives was Logan County Sheriff Don Chafin, involved in the Battle of Blair Mountain.
I had a feeling you were going to tell me that, because there was something I think maybe we had done in a podcast before talking about Don Chafin and having some connections to that famous feud. Well, now I know where it comes from.
Yeah, indeed. And it's a very interesting story. And this is a very interesting family. Both of them are. The McCoys and the Hatfields. They have been a part of Appalachian history, well, ever since that feud back in the 1880s. In fact, if you talk about Appalachian history, that is probably the most popular part of the history of this part of the country that there is. People just love stories about the Hatfields and the McCoys, no matter whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on television in the form of movies, whether it's on the radio, or whether it's in a podcast or on a website. That is what folks like to hear about what happened in Appalachia.
Well, you mentioned movies, of course, the miniseries that was on, what was it, during the decade of the 20-teens or something like that, of where Kevin Costner and company got together for that Hatfield and McCoy miniseries, at least on the History Channel. A lot of people liked it. There were a lot of people that said, no, it's not true. There's a lot of dispute about it. Then there is, of all things, folks, and I just heard about this the other day, one of the local teams, I guess, around here, one of the local basketball teams, they're selling chances to win tickets to the Hatfield and McCoy Dinner Theater down in the Smokies.
Really?
Now, the Smokies are about as far removed from eastern Kentucky and southern West Virginia as they can get, but they know how to pull people down there by just simply having the name Hatfield and McCoys.
I wonder why they didn't give away tickets to go up and ride on the trails up there, the Hatfield and McCoy trails up in West Virginia.
Well, I know that. I was going to say they've got trails like that. You know, that would be even more interesting. But, you know, I guess it's the glamour. It's the saying that, oh, I was at the Hatfield and McCoy Dinner Theater or something like that. But, you know, folks, let me just throw a little, disclaimer out here to you. That's all for show. There was more of a real side to this story than, a lot of people let on about.
That's true. And that, folks, is the story of what happened to the main players in the Hatfield-McCoy feud after the feud ended. Another bit of the history of this place we call home, Appalachia. Thanks for watching. If you like our stories, be sure to subscribe to the Stories channel by clicking the subscribe button down below. Till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.
So long.